Maharawa wa tātou mahinga te kore mahi tonu, tāwhiti rao to tātou haerenga te kore haere tonu. Loosely translates means we've come too far not to go further, we've done too much not to do more.
This podcast is proudly supported by the Ōtara Network Action Committee, ōNAC, community-owned, community-driven and community-led.
Kia ora once again, and welcome back to the We Are Ōtara podcast, led by the ōNAC team, amazing team of people, and I hope you, well, if you see them, go and give them a big high five. They are community-owned, community-driven, community-led. Now, we had an amazing interview with Norm McKenzie. He briefly explained about his journey, especially about him being an accountant here in New Zealand and the struggles that he had gone through. And with that, he had to go away from New Zealand, in which most journeys are led to into different spots like America as well as the UK. And at that time, learned a lot of things from those different countries, which he couldn't learn here in New Zealand. And then he came back to New Zealand with all that knowledge and experience and led an amazing team now to basically to empower our people who need that experience and who need that, basically trust. So if you're in that situation where you need to have that empowerment, you need some advice and basically how to get out of there, then this is the podcast you should watch. So please do watch this episode. It's an amazing one. One of my top 5 personal bests. So go ahead and watch it. Once again, kia ora. Going back to like you had your 2 meetings earlier this morning, and I was just like, I just came in, and then you came in so early in the morning. You're going, what? So that's not 2 o'clock already. you caught me with my pants off. I'm going, trying to scramble and trying to get everything ready. Going, I haven't got my questions ready. Okay, I got time to do all the question stuff and whatnot. So what I mean by questions is that what topics to go through, and I was doing my research, and the big one that stuck out for me was the Māori and Pacifica trades that you set up for our people that are struggling to get up there in terms of finding jobs and training. And for myself, it was early 2008, left high school, not having the right credentials to go into university. I found it very difficult. But to hear that you did something like that around 2012, what made you think of that for our people who were trying to get up there?
Yeah. Look, I can't take the credit for setting it up. Okay. I came in and there are 16 Māori Pacifica trade training consortia in Aotearoa. There are 2 in Auckland. I'm the kaihautu of one, which sits under the Auckland Council, and that's called the Southern Initiative Māori Pacifica Trades Training. The other one in Auckland is the Auckland Māori Pacifica Trade Training, and Sam Sefuiva leads that. The difference between the 2 is that Sam's consortia has the big TEOs in there, like MIT, Unitec, Te Wānanga Aotearoa. We purposely chose to stay with small private training enterprises who are more fleet of foot, and can work to a work regime for our employers and make a difference. So the difference in all of that is that we have memorandums of understanding with about 30 of our biggest infrastructure, construction and allied trade employers and ICT. And those are people like Higgins, Fulton Hogan, Downers, Hawkins, Dempsey Wood, the big Tier 1, Tier 2 infrastructure organisations. Auckland Council spend about $3 billion a year with those sorts of organisations. Wow. So what we observed when I first came on was there was an observation on my part, because my background's corporate. Yeah. My whole life's been in corporate. And what I observed was there's an opportunity to leverage. And we could go to the owners, the CEs and the managing directors of those companies and say, we want you to participate in our trades training under a memorandum of understanding, which is not a legal document, but it's a statement of intent. But we want you to be willing employers and provide jobs with dignity, which are long-term sustainable and staircased, and a good employer matrix, which leads to a living wage currently set in Tamaki Makaurau of $30 an hour, so that our underserved community in West and South Auckland get to progress, and they don't live with 3 families in a house to pay the rent. One family can survive on $30 an hour with a family. They don't get to buy a house, but they get to go to the movies once a month. They can go for a camping trip down to, they don't go to Rarotonga, but they can go to the Bay of Plenty on a camping trip, which families now don't get to experience mostly.
Not often.
So that's what drove me to it.
Yeah, I noticed, especially the last 2 years, minus COVID being the main minority of just a bunch of things being halted. Even before then, a lot of families don't have the means to do such things as luxurious as to go to a trip with their families, because as often as we like to say that, I'm connected with my family, but we don't necessarily have time for it because we're always busy and ongoing, because we have to keep up with financial upkeeping. With that said, what was it like during your times of you working not within corporate, but you coming up to where you are now? Was it difficult to find work during your time period?
Well, I'm an old boy of a Māori boarding school, Hato Pētara to be precise. Myself and 7 brothers went to Hato Pētara, so we have quite a whakapapa there. I think they gave me the confidence to go out and do what I did, which was to go into accounting. So I started work as a cadet accountant with a company called Wilberforce and Company, now called Ernst & Young, and I progressed my career in that space. Very difficult for me because, institutionalised racism was alive and well. I mean, I'll give you one example, is that sitting in the office of Wilberforce and Company I think I was about an 18-year-old back in the early 70s, and one of the partners yelled out to me in an open plan environment, said, "Geez, Norm, what the hell do you Maoris want now?" And it was Dame Whinakoopa on the Land March, and the noise had just rocketed to the 14th floor where we were residing. So that speaks levels to some of the experiences I had. That was not unusual. I went and worked in a corporate building. I didn't realise that these corporate buildings had toilets in them. So where we were based in a Norwich Union building on Durham Street, Queen Street, I used to go up to the public toilets. Got confronted many a time in that space. So probably, that's probably the background that I come. I come from a family of 7 brothers and 3 sisters. We're from Ngāti Kauki Whangaroa, up in the far north. And I think we all experienced institutionalised racism as part of that. And I think where I made the changes when I went to America for a year, ended up in the United Kingdom, and I had what people would call a meteoric rise within the corporate structure, and did very well in England. I would never have done as well in New Zealand until I did what I did within England, to be fair, because they didn't see me as an Indigenous person. They just saw me with this person from New Zealand with a tan.
Yeah.
And I did. I had a really successful. I went from selling in the field to the sales and marketing director of the United Kingdom and Europe. Huge staff amount at the time, and progressed from there. So that's what brought me, and then that brought me home because our eldest daughter was born in Durham, in England, and at 3 years old, my wife decided that she wanted her to grow up in New Zealand, so we came home.
So you mentioned that you went from America to the UK. Was there a big cultural difference in terms of being in that work environment in the UK? Was it any different from being in New Zealand in the setting? Were there people that were willing to help you out, to go, "Oh, you just started, here's your help"? Was it more open in the UK than it is in New Zealand? From what I've heard, you were there was a lot of battles when you were here. You had to go to the UK to see something different.
I think you've summed it up really, Vinny. I think getting to the United Kingdom and working in the same space I was working in here, they didn't see, there was no racial disharmony with me, although England's not too bad at that itself, but certainly with me they saw that I was very, I was easily movable, so they took me from London, moved me to Swindon, moved me to Birmingham to Newcastle, Newcastle to Leeds, in the space of 5 years, because I was so easy to move, and my wife and I my acquaintances became my friends, and so it became easy enough to do. And I had an accounting background and a postgraduate degree in marketing as well, and so that helped drive some of that as well. And I think genuinely there was I think everything's down to communication, in my humble opinion, and building relationships. And so I wasn't too bad at that. And I think that's a Māori thing. I think it's a cultural thing that we don't do enough of in this country, that would add a lot more value to the business componentry of New Zealand, that would sell a lot more in terms of product and services. And I think that's where my difference was, that point of difference was.
Yeah. So you come back to New Zealand. What was the first thing you did when you came back here? So you came back with all this amazing knowledge from America to the UK, come back here. First thing you do is, did you go straight back into the field of accounting, or were you taking a little break and you were trying to think of something that you needed to do?
Well, I transferred back with the company I was working with. So the company I joined in England was the company I was working with here.
Oh, wow.
It was a printing manufacturing company, $2.3 billion company worldwide. And so when I went to England, I joined it there. And so when I came back, I transferred back with the same company in a senior leadership role in New Zealand. So I was already, it was the senior leadership role in New Zealand. So I came back into that space. I got back on the 19th, and I started work on a Friday, and I started work on the Monday.
Wow.
So there was no rest. It was straight back into it.
Jeez.
And a big, probably as big a role that I was doing in the United Kingdom, but with a smaller population and smaller teams. So I came straight back into it, to answer your question.
So from there, what made you decide to have the shift, to change your tone in go into a project like Southern Initiative? What was the spark that made you think, this is not what I wanted to do, or you wanted to think of something that you were in that situation, just wanted to change? I was
semi-retired, is what I was, and then I got approached by Frank Solomon from the Solomon Group. Approached me and said, look, there's a entity out in South Auckland that's been running for a few years, and you should have a look at it. And so I did, and it's become a passion. What I do at the Southern Initiative Māori Pacific Trades Training is passion. It's not work. I don't feel like it's work. I can work this 24/7 in the weekends, and I don't feel like I'm burning myself out, because what it's doing for our community and for our underserved community particularly. So it wasn't a hard decision. I'd semi-retired. I was sitting on a few boards in the far north and a couple of commercial boards in Auckland. I had to retire some of those to give the time to do what I'm doing now. And so that was an easy move. I just have to play less golf.
I must say, you might. I'm just thinking after you say that, you must have a mean putt afterwards.
What?
You must have a mean putt, like putting for golf.
No, I'm not very good at golf, I've decided, but I love it.
Fair enough. So, with the Southern, you work with the Southern Initiative. With our community, you mentioned our communities. What is it that you see within our communities that are currently lacking in terms of getting into jobs and whatnot? Because you see quite of a big difference between if you look at somewhere like West Auckland, Central Auckland, in those different areas are striving in their own ways, and then you have South Auckland where there's numbers of jobs that are, people who need jobs. So, what is it that you see that we as a community need to do to be able to catch up with those around us?
Look, I think that's a really good question. I think it's fraught with a whole lot of potholes along the way in terms of how we address it. But what I see is that our community, Māori and Pacifica particularly, have been challenged with things like where back in the 70s when Pacifica people were brought in as cheap labour, colonisation has affected Māori and still is to this day. Those sort of hangovers that we're still dealing with as a community, and you see a lot of our own whānau, my own whānau included, that haven't been through the right distilling mechanisms to get them into what I feel are jobs with dignity, and they haven't. They see a benefit as a long-term regime in a lot of families, and they haven't quite got out of that spoke. Look, the example I'd use is we ran a Mahi Pipiri Angamua roadshow recently, and we ran it in conjunction with MSD, and they said, look, we've got a database of people that have put their hands up for infrastructure construction in the allied trades, and it was a significant database. It was 7,000 people that put their hand up for that. Māori Pacifica, between the ages of 16 and 40, who fitted our criteria. So that's a great place to start. So we set up an electronic system through Monkey Chip, that process, working with an organisation to do that. We had our five private training enterprises registered online. We had 15 employers registered online, and we had 130 people, potential employees, tauira, that registered with us. So I won't do the numbers, but out of 7,000, we had 130 that registered. On the day, we had mihi whakatau, so the local kaumātua out at the airport basically set the tone to say that this is not about saying to young people coming in to meet these private training enterprises and employers and giving them a bad experience. It's about those organisations embracing them, surrounding them with a korowai to encourage them to join. And on the day, 138 turned up. We think that's a positive. So we've got some walk-ins, if you like. And now we're tracking every single one of them. We're going to find out if they're into the private training enterprise, and that our pastoral care people will stay with every single one of those people for a minimum of 13 months. So if they went to a PTE, they'll track them, and they'll go from the training enterprise into mahi through one of our memorandum of understanding employers. If they may have been picked up directly by an employer who sold the sizzle and said, yes, I want to join straight away, our pastoral care whānau will stay with them for 13 months, sit with the employer and arrange a professional development plan. The ones that they can't get a hold of, they will go back to MSD and they'll be on the books. They probably have gone back into the MSD regime. The job of our pastoral care people to go into them and to find out what is it that we did wrong that they didn't come into our PTE or employment. What do we need to do differently or better to get them engaged? So that's a process we think is not being done by anybody else out there. It's not being tracked correctly. So we're running a drug rehabilitation program as well with New Zealand Drug Foundation. There's a group of us working on that. That's a long-term thing. We've been working on it for 2 years to find what it is that employers and potential employees can come to agree on in terms of employment where drugs are concerned. We're working on a portal, an electronic portal through Mission Ready HQ, who are our ICT PTE, and they're developing a portal that'll follow the tauira, the employee and the employer for life. So they won't drop off the system, and we'll stay engaged with them for as long as necessary to keep them attached to the labour market in their progression. So we think that's a model that works. we know it works. We know that pre-COVID, 78% of our whānau were attaching to the labour market. Now, remember, we're talking about our underserved community here. We're talking about, and I don't like to use the terms like vulnerable, not in education, employment and training, because our research has shown us that our whānau don't like those terms. So our whānau came up with the term underserved, and we must always put a hyphen in between the under and the served, because people were terming it as undeserved. And so small things, but very important things in terms of tracking and chasing. So that was before COVID. It's dropped down significantly. Our biggest problem right now is attracting those whānau to our courses. And so I use that example, 138 out of 7,000. We need to get better at that.
Yeah,
much better.
Absolutely. Just hearing that it amazes me, because if you had to talk to Vincent in 2008, yes, there was support in PTEs and ITPs out there, and there was this big whole, if I remember correctly, there was this big whole rush to education after college, because I was in high school and all I remember was that teachers go to university, don't go straight into a job, just go straight into the educational path. But we never had the accountability or the tracking, like you had mentioned before, where they guide you through those steps, because you're a very impressionable 18-year-old or 17-year-old who doesn't know where to go or where to go from. So it's very refreshing from now to hear something like this, because then I hear, if something ever happens to my niece in the further years, I can refer to someone like yourself and get them along the way in the right direction. Because again, what I feel is that most of our teenagers who don't know where they're going don't know about these services, and it's vital to hear something like this if they do get to hear this podcast.
Absolutely. I think one of the tragedies is that we dropped the trades training back in the 70s. I think that was a tragedy because I stayed in, I don't know if you even know, Taumata Flats in Parnell, and that was made up of trading people. There were painters, there were panel beaters, there were electricians, and myself in our flat, we had a teacher going to Teachers Training College. We had 2 lawyers, and myself doing accounting. And so that was our flat. But we were all helped to get through and mentored ourselves in some respects to get to that space. And I think the tragedy is that people don't see the trades in the same equity as tertiary education. And I can tell you now that if I had my time again, I wouldn't do accounting. I'd be a sparky. I think there is much more opportunity in the trades. And if you go to Sweden, Germany, those places, it's the other way around. The trades are valued more highly in those countries than they are here. And I think that's a tragedy with our education system. And Māori and Pacifica were told to go there. There's no, I don't think our educational system, university and the politics really have over the years, until recently, with the event of Te Wana Aotearoa and Okawa and the likes that have a Māori definition to them. But prior to that, if you went to university as I did, you're on your own. There was no support. You went up there and you just made your way through life. The thing that kept you together in my day was the Kiwi pub. There was a pub called the Kiwi, and there were a lot of people there. We all mixed and mingled there, predominantly 90% Māori that were in those spaces. So I think that's the big tragedy of it all. And I think getting that equity in that in the trades training and the tertiary quals is about getting it right. And I think Ministry of Education needs to take some responsibility to change that.
Absolutely. And if I remember correctly, correct me on this. Like early 2000s, most of our already established tradies were already going to Australia because of the paychecks, and we had a shortage of tradies. Because I remember this being, because I watched the news when I was little. I remember that there was a shortage of sparkies as well as just general builders, and I remember there was a call to arms for these trades to be filled in, but and I felt like they were doing it in the wrong way, and because they were just going, go through your normal 5 to 6 year training and whatnot, and it wasn't really attracting people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think that's, we haven't really changed that much, really. And at the end of the day, we've still got those issues, which is why private training enterprises are much better to work with, because when you lose somebody like Ama Training, which is a Māori kaupapa, Etco, who's their chief financial officer, is Māori and is a very good line of sight on why we want more Māori and Pacifica into those spaces. Vertical Horizons, where people like Phil Hokianga, who's a director of that company, give ex-SAS, Māori Tūturu, and coming through with those sort of dynamics. Mission Ready HQ has got an Indigenous Indian woman running it, but really understands the whole Indigenous kaupapa. Who's the other one? Who have I missed in that space? Oceana Career Academy, which is a really high Pacifica uptake through the whānau. So that's why we chose them, and we can go to them and say, look, our employers want to run a training program to do this, this and this. They can go away, they can write it. Within a month we can have it signed off, fees free for our students, and get it done, and then they get an opportunity to work in that space. So those are the things that need to help. I don't think we're doing very well from a governance perspective because what we're allowed to do at TSI MPTT, or Southern Initiative Māori Pacifica Trades Training, we're allowed to be disruptive. People don't realise that's working within the Auckland Council environment. They don't know we exist. So we're allowed to be disruptive and to test and fail fast. So what that means is we can go out there and be completely, when you're disruptive, you create innovation. And that's what's brought our consortia to where it is. So when you have training enterprises that can deliver exactly the kaupapa you want them to deliver, and employers that are willing to take the risk. And I have yet to have a CE, MD or owner tell me they can't do it. When you get down to dealing with the people that have to implement it, they would challenge me, and I would just say, well, you show me your balance sheet and I'll show you how you can do it. It's not a hard thing to do. And you can do that when you've come from a corporate background that I've come from, and to experience that. So I had, more people in that space with that capability and competence, with the relationship skills to chat to those CEOs, managing directors and owners and bring them into our environment, show them in 2.5 hours what the community and social innovation team do in the way of being disruptive and testing and failing fast. Nobody ever says, no, it can't be done. We had one company, Ferrovial, which is a Spanish company. Its turnover is greater than New Zealand's gross domestic product. And they flew their CEO from Spain, picked up the CEO for Asia Pacific in Melbourne, and she flew with that manager, the CEO, to New Zealand with her 7 GMs to sign our MOU. That's the leverage we have to bring to the floor and get them to be willing. And that makes a big difference. We have at that Mahi Pipiriangamua, the roadshow, there were 500 jobs going that day. 500 jobs that would lead to long-term sustainable staircase employment and a living wage. And we only had 138 applicants for it. And we're looking at the case study to see exactly how many of them attached. And we'll just keep that on. We need to get that into the agencies in Wellington, MST, MB, TPK, and say this works, and this is the model you need to put around our whānau in terms of a korowai, so that they are successful. And if you don't do it that way, and because look, my experience with MST is all over the place. With my own whānau, they need to know that what their full entitlements are, but they're never advised that. When you rock up to an MST interview, you there as somebody looking for help, you go and say, oh, I need some help with my accommodation. Oh yeah, we can do that. What MSD should be doing, saying, look, here are all of your entitlements, and give it to them all. Don't piecemeal it, because that doesn't help them out of the rut that they're in. And the conversations I have with my Pākehā whānau is, look, do you think that their beneficiaries are ripping off the system? If you think they're in such a good life, you go and live it. Absolutely. And you tell me how you can do that. And when I talk to employers that say that $30 an hour is unacceptable, we can't pay that because it'll drive me to a position that's untenable, I say, well, get your business model right. the country is basically funding you to employ people. And that's what occurs. They pay the minimum wage or the training wage, and that's insufficient for our families to survive on. So they have to go to the agencies, have these entitlement discussions that they're never fully transparent with, and they stay in that rut and they don't get out of it. I don't think the system helps Māori or Pacifica. In my mind, I think it keeps them in the space where they are, and I don't think that's good for the tino rangatiratanga.
No, absolutely. And just going with what you were just saying earlier, these businesses not seeing, the benefits of just even a simple $30 an hour, not realizing that $30 could benefit them in the long run, because currently not only that they have to figure out what's going on with their family members, but if you remove certain calls from them, you as an individual, you have to worry about your own expenses, your own well-being, and inflation is the key word for the last 3 years. A lot of the key items to live is gas, food, and shelter. That's gone up drastically.
Absolutely. You did right. Food, shelter, clothing. The basics of life, right? And our whānau don't have that. Where the whānau living on the street, predominantly Māori Pacifica, they don't choose to be there. Some people might come and say, oh, look, they have homes to go to, but they're on the street there's a reason for it. We need to find out exactly why they're in that place, and how can we put resource into them to get them to a whole new... There's a company out there called Trowel, run by Sire and Joe Vagana, ex-League fellows, and they've set up an organisation when they started off, a small company, but they employed our whānau on the street, and those whānau are still working with them to this day, and that's like 10 years longer. They started off building the motorway into Hamilton, and they've just grown and grown and grown as a business. They understand it. So Amotai is part of the Auckland Council regime. Amotai is made up of over 650 Māori and Pacifica businesses. So my board has told me that we need you to be training up people for Amotai businesses rather than these Tier 1 companies, because Tier 1, I have to go and sell the sizzle. Māori and Pacifica business, I don't need to talk to them about a living wage. They get it, right? When they're sitting down and they're talking to our whānau, they're talking about they are talking about the whānau, not just the person in front of them. So all of those sort of the dynamics. We get in behind the wire with Serco and Witty Women's. We run training programs from there, and we also transition them into jobs with dignity as well. So they're part of our underserved community. So one of our board members is from Ministry of Women's, Riri Piti Riri. She gave us some data that basically said that if you want a recidivist wahine toa from behind the wire to attach to the labour market, you've got to stay with them for 13 months. So that's what we do as a minimum. And we adopted that about 5 years ago. And it works. You've got to give the right manaaki tangata or pastoral care to these people, and not dilute it along the way, and not make it, stop this bashing process. It's all about carrot. There's no stick when you're at the bottom of the barrow, which beneficiaries predominantly are. Poverty is a cost to this country. The more people we get out of poverty, the better the country. And that's all about, that's just basic economics 101 to me. So I understand that. The CEOs, managing directors and owners of companies fully understand it. It's the people that work for them that are challenged with bringing it to the table.
And that's a challenge on its own, right? So you get a good understanding. So with that said, what is it that you want to see in the near future for your current project? What is it that you want to see flourish from that?
Yeah, I don't think the Southern Initiative Māori Pacifica Trades Training is about scale. It's about, as I said before, testing and failing fast, and being disruptive. And that's and then what needs to occur better is the transition down to the agencies to tell them, this works, whānau, do it correctly, surround our whānau with the right amount, resource, capability, competence, whatever that takes. The one example, and I think that's why I was approached by council when I was in semi-retirement, was I sit on one of the boards in Whangaroa, and at the time I was the acting CE while we were finding a new CE. And at the time, there was a huge suicide kōrero going on in the country. The highest suicide rates was in Taitokoro. And within Taitokoro, the highest suicide rate was in Mairohe, in Whangaroa. So we had to find a solution to that. And at the time, Mike King had just put his hand up and said, I think I can help here. None of the agencies wanted to touch Mike. And as the acting CEO, I said, Mike, come and see me. And that was a long time ago. He came up with a solution. He said to me, he said, Norm, the only person that are going to be able to open doors in your rohe, open marae doors, is going to be a whānau member with the capabilities and competence to do that, but a whānau member. So we did that, and that worked. 10 years later, that's turning a whole... And one whānau, we had 3 suicides. One boy was 10 years old. And in that same family, in that particular marae, it's turning itself around now. But it's taken a long time to do that. But that's what you've got to do. You've got to find somebody in the whānau. In that particular case was the right thing to do. Surround that person with all the capability and competence, and then resource it to deliver the success that particular whānau is now having. Those are the examples that I want our agencies to pick up on. And I think that's why Oranga Tamariki are going through this huge review. I think that's part of it. When you see some of the stuff down in Hawke's Bay, and Dame Rangimari Eglavish putting her hand up to push that forward. She sits on the board I report to. So we've got a very capable board who can do that stuff when you've got Ministry of Women's represented, corrections are represented, Iwi through Dame Rangimari Eglavish is represented, PTEs through Mission Ready HQ, we've got BCITO on the board, we've got infrastructure through Connexus on the board, got 2 employers in that space representing. We have a Pacifica person in Anna Jane being represented as well. So it's really, when you have a strong board like that, they're very challenging. And you've got to have the capability and competence operationally to give them the comfort that what's going on operationally is actually feeding into all of those different areas. So when you've got all of MSD, MB, TPK, them alone on your board, you've got them all in one. And I'm saying to them, what are you telling your agencies about what we're doing to get them to buy into it? And that's what needs to occur. That needs to be a lot harder and pushed a lot harder.
Fair enough. Last question I always like to leave my audience with this is that do you have a piece of advice or a quote that you like to leave with anyone who's listening, who most of our viewers and listeners are just looking for a piece of advice to encourage them to get out there and to, just for hope. So would you have something like that?
Maha rawa. E tika ana te kōrero a tātou tūpuna. Our people gone have great whakataukis, right? And the one that resonates with me with Sir James Henare. Maha rawa wa tātou mahinga te kore mahi tonu, tāwhiti rawa to tātou haerenga te kore haere tonu. Loosely translates means we've come too far not to go further. We've done too much not to do more. And I probably... that would be the whakatauki I leave for our whanaunga.
That is amazing. I just want to let you know that Tippy Arthur had said the same thing and had the same meaning behind it. And it's to hear it once more. It for me as a Samoan, to hear it has a lot of meaning behind it. And thank you for sharing that once more and just reaffirming it for me so I can be able to keep that close to my heart.
Kia ora, Vinny. Kia ora.
Thank you once again, and awesome to interview you, sir.
Kia ora. Tēnā koe. Ngā mihi kia koutou katoa.
Thank you, sir.
Tēnā koe.
Thank you all for watching. I hope you have an amazing day and hope you enjoyed this episode.